There's an old Latin phrase which you've heard me use before. It is tempus fugit, which means time flies. In 2 weeks' time, we will come to the end of November, the end of another liturgical year, and then we'll begin the season of Advent. Seemed like only yesterday, but it's been 6 years since I've been here. And in my first homily, I said the following: Beloved, I did not come to form a fan club. I came to work with you to build the kingdom. And I remember someone asking me, Father, what do you mean by not forming a fan club? So I said, as human beings, we belong to one group or another. We are by nature social beings because we are a people of the Trinity, and therefore we align ourselves to one group or another. The problem is, beloved, sometimes groups can either help us to advance in the spiritual life, or it can actually be a hindrance. Sometimes fan clubs develop a false sense of superiority. Fan clubs say who is in and who is out. Fan clubs say, who do I support and who do I try to drag down? Fan clubs can be dangerous, especially if they're not a people who practice discernment. In today's gospel, the parable that Jesus shares, he identifies two types of groups. One group he calls the wise. The other group he calls foolish. Since we are a people who belong to different groups, perhaps we can ask ourselves, am I with the group that's wise? Or am I with the group that's foolish? You cannot escape them. That's the reality of life. When Jesus shares a parable, he's drawing on the experiences of life. And he's pointing in a certain direction for those who choose to listen and therefore learn. And this morning, as we ponder on the self and the group to which I belong, perhaps we can ask ourselves, where am I? Where are we as we progress and listen to the voice of our God? 3 things we can reflect on. The first, the wise are those who understand the following. If I go to the airport and present a passport that's not mine, and present a ticket that's not mine, chances are I probably will not be allowed to enter the plane. If I happen to encounter a sleepy immigration officer who doesn't recognize all that's happening, that's why scriptures warn us, stay awake, and I happen to go on the plane, which has happened before, and either end up in the country I'm supposed to go or in another country, as has happened, chances are we may not escape the second encounter. And when the immigration officer that we encounter when we land, when we get there, sees that we have a different passport, what's going to happen? We're going to be ejected. We're going to be sent home. The wise understands the following. As I give thanks for the people who formed my spiritual life, parents, families, friends, pastors, deacons, lay leaders, all the others, there comes a point when I must stop pointing to the teacher and start saying, I now know who God is. There comes a point when, after all the teaching has been done, the wise individual and the wise group says, I hear everything, I see everything, but now I know who God is. And because I now know who God is, I have the courage to share who God is in the group. The wise draw close to God so that God, in the words of Scripture, can draw close to us. Who are the foolish? The foolish is the very opposite. The foolish are the ones who say, there is still time. In today's parable, the foolish didn't bring the oil And when they were told, you have to go and buy some, they thought they had time to go and get the oil. In other words, beloved, using the language from the parable, the foolish believe that I can still depend on the faith of my parents, the faith of my spouse, the faith of my friends, while I go and do what I want. The foolish believe that there's always time to draw close tomorrow. Let me keep my distance from God today. The foolish fail to understand that when God made us, He invites each of us to draw close to Him. But too many belong to church, but do not belong to God. Too many belong to church, go to church, present in church, but they are far from God. And how do we know this? Scripture says, by their fruits they are known. Where are we in the spectrum of our lives and in the groups to which we align ourselves and belong? Are we with the wise who do all that we can to draw close to God, or are we still with the foolish group? Because we have to discern as we go through life. If the people that you and I are connected with are not helping me to grow in my relationship with God, beloved, they are hindering me. And we hear what happens with the foolish group. The door is closed. God doesn't want that. So what does God say? As you draw close to me, learn. Second point. Learn how to listen to my voice. My words are spirit, says the Lord, and they are life. The wise are the ones who understand that when we draw close to God, we present our pains, our sufferings, our joys to Him in prayer. And then we ask for the grace to keep the mouth, shut the mouth, settle the mind, and say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. And how do we listen to the voice of God? First and foremost, it's found in Scripture. Scriptures tell us plainly how to live, how to approach issues of life, how to grow in faith. But too many, beloved, too many ignore that. The wise understands that we must prepare for the second coming. And in order to prepare for that second coming, the wise learns how to quiet the mind, the heart, the body, and spirit, and choose to listen to God and follow His ways. What do the foolish do? The foolish spend more time sharing their thoughts, their words, their perceptions, their judgments, which usually all culminate in death. We live in a culture of death, and we celebrate death, and we take a certain joy sometimes in bringing death to others. That's what we have to fight against. That's what we call spiritual battle. Jesus says, I am the life and the resurrection. So we who follow Him must bring and speak life to others. And if we belong to that group that speaks life and celebrate life with others, we are wise. But when we allow ourselves to keep being aligned with those whose only words and thoughts and judgments are about death and destruction, we have time, beloved, to recognize that we are in the foolish bracket. And sooner or later, time will run out. God doesn't want that. Scripture says over and over, God desires all to be saved. So the wise understand that it's in the present moment, not tomorrow, that we must pay attention to our God. I've asked you this before, and I'll ask again. When you sit with your group, how much of that time do we spend sharing the Word and what the Word means, as opposed to how much of that time is spent tearing down a brother or a sister? The first is a wise group. The second is a foolish group. And that's why some people can never grow. But for those who choose to listen to God, who says, draw close to me and know my love and mercy, learn how to listen to my voice and allow my word, not your word nor the word of another, to form you. Allow my word to form your conscience. It then leads to the third and final point. That the wise are those who not only prepare for the coming, but by the choices they make and the lifestyle that they live, when the bridegroom comes, we are ready. The wise then understands the following. that we're all weak people. And so we need each other's support. And so if someone in the group that is wise falls, the wisdom of the crowd says, let us reach out and help the fallen brother or sister. Because that is what wise, loving people do. Who are the foolish? The foolish have so habitually bought into the practice of death and destruction that when someone fails or falls, even within that same group, there's a false sense of superiority. There is the animal instinct. You fell, I am going to attack you. That's the foolish mentality. Sometimes, beloved, when we encounter darkness in others, we must remember that you and I are called to be lights, even if the other fails to reveal that same light back to each of us. Just this morning, I was glancing at the newspaper. The Gleaner headline gave a scary truth that our Jamaican men are taking their vows seriously. Till death do us part. What's happening? Our Jamaican men are increasingly killing their wives and committing suicide. If we are to believe this report, it also says that our Jamaican men, they are exceeding others in other countries in this particular negative behavior. Where's that coming from? I said to you before, we live in a culture of death that tends to habitually celebrate death and judging others in a negative way. But we have to face a certain truth. Again, another headline I shared with you 6 years ago. A large portion of our population are walking around with psychological disorders. And that is where you and I will be challenged. A large number of our people are walking around with psychological disorders. And they may not know it or see it, but they make life very difficult for those who love them and know them. That is why for some it's so easy to kill. You ask how it's so easy to kill? Some of them it's not too connected upstairs. But if none of us sitting here this morning have ever killed anyone with a knife or a gun or any other instrument, the fact is too many of God's people take a certain joy in the habit of destroying another person's name or character. And it's all because those foolish believe there's always tomorrow to convert. Today, beloved, right here, right now, salvation is at hand. What will be the choice that you and I make? Do we continue to draw close to God as we are called to do? Will we allow greater room in our lives to allow His Word to shape and form us and not the people that are necessarily connected to us? Will the choices and the lifestyle we live, even if sometimes we fail and fall, will they show that we belong to God, whose love, whose mercy, whose presence will always be ours? The choice is ours. Jesus says, let your light so shine so that others may see me and see my glory and come to know who I am. A God who is faithful, a God who is loving, a God who is always going to be present. To this great God of life, love, and mercy, beloved, be glory and praise forever and ever.